I know we're going to have a few people streaming in, but I thought we'll just get started right on the dot. I'm Karen Chauvin. I'm the CEO of Enviro Integration Strategies, and I'm also the formal lead of the Tailings Working Group for CIM's Environment Social Responsibility Society. And today we're going to be talking about improving outcomes of decisions that are made all the way through our development phases and design phases and even into operations and closure. But we really want to look for how do we do things better so that we have great outcomes for, environmental risks, social aspects, and so on. And it's something that our group has been talking about for over a year now. All these ideas have come up. So I'm really excited to kick this series off with this session. Today we have 3 speakers with us, and I'll just give David Clary an introduction because he's going to be our moderator today. So David Clary started out as a civil and mechanical engineer, and he quickly moved into business planning and risk management in mining with Hatch. He was leading teams there for many years before joining Hudbay Minerals as the VP of Sustainability. And he's now enjoying consulting on various projects with his own business called Innotane. So David, I'm going to let you take over and introduce Louise and Andrew.
Thank you, Karen. I will give some quick introductions to Andrew and Louise and then hand over to them to move us forward. We've got 2 panelists that each bring some very relevant practical experience to the discussion that Karen introduced. And I'll start with Louise Grandin, who has a career that included 20 years with Agnico Eagle in environmental, health and safety, community relations, and human resources roles, ultimately as Senior Vice President of People and Culture. Since retiring from Agnico in 2021, Louise remains active in the industry, I think in multiple ways, but I know in particular on the boards of West Dome Mines and Champion Iron. And Louise's professional credentials include membership in the Ordre des Ingénieurs in Quebec and the Professional Engineers of Ontario, and also a fellow in the Canadian Academy of Engineering. So Louise brings quite a breadth of technical and the very human and cultural aspects of engineering and mining. Andrew Taylor is Vice President Atlantic Operations at St. Barbara, and he spent 17 years in rising in engineering roles at, and I have to say Inco and then Vale in the Sudbury operations. And then since 2020, he has worked with St. Barbara's Atlantic operations in various capacities that I think he will detail. And Andrew holds a Bachelor of Science with a concentration in chemistry and a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering, or Metallurgical Engineering, I'm sorry. So I will perhaps hand to Louise first to give about 10 minutes background on the project work that she wants to particularly highlight in this discussion, and then we'll turn to Andrew to give some background on what he wants to bring into the fore, and then we'll have follow up with discussion and Q&A after that. So Louise, if I can turn to you for our next piece. Oh, hang on, Louise, I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, because I was on mute. I'm very eloquent on mute, I'll tell you. But anyway, so I was going to talk about 2 projects that are one is at the beginning, like at the Greenfield, Meliadine, and the other one is LaRonde, which had been in operation for 30 years. So both of them now have dry stack tailings. So I'm going to just talk about how it came up at Meliadine and how it was handled, and at LaRonde as well. So let's start with Meliadine. So Meliadine was a project that was owned by Comaplex, and it's a project in Nunavut, about, I think it's 50 kilometers or maybe 30 kilometers from Rankin Inlet and fairly close to the coast of Hudson Bay. And it was at the time an exploration project, but it had a project description already. And the project description had a thickened tailings solution. So the project was to have thickened tailings at that time. So it was, and I will also tell you that the Agnico, I say we, still we, Agnico bought in 2010, but the decision to go for dry stack was selected in 2014, and the project approval, like permitting, was done in 2015. So you have a 5-year, like it was not a short span of time in which you had to make this project feasible economically and technically, like the whole project, starting from milling, mining, and everything. And it's an underground mine. So the tailings was part of the overall iterative process of designing something that would make money. And I remember the first feasibility study came out with 3% IRR. So everybody around the table was working on trying to reduce the cost. And so at that time, I think we had started using multiple account analysis for decisions involving tailings and waste rock and stuff like that. So we did a multiple account analysis, which identified, I think it was 3 options that were the best options for tailings management. So one of these options, and they all involve, because you may know Nunavut a little bit, but it's full of lakes. Like you cannot go anywhere without being before encroaching into a water body. So we were looking at a lake that's called B7 because it wasn't like it was a water body, but not really with a name. So we named them B1, B2. So we were encroaching on B7 with the thickened tailings, but the dry stack didn't. The dry stack was the footprint was enough to be able to save B7. So it was in there in the multiple account analysis. And the first time around, we didn't choose a dry stack. We didn't choose dry stack because, you know, of the economics. And what were the other? The footprint was definitely important, but the mine is close to a lake called Meliadine Lake, which is a really a busy place for Inuits. They have cabins there, so they were really not too keen on having a tailings pond nearby, or a mine for that effect. So we had to work really with them for them to understand the technology. So we were going through the permitting, and our Vice President Environment, Michel Julien, not to name him, was, you know, he was really keen on trying to save that lake and gain approval for the dry stack. So he worked relentlessly, looking at, okay, what can we do to familiarize people with dry stack? So we went to visit the Raglan mine, where they have in a similar setting. And we also had the Pinos Altos, which is a mine of Agnico in Mexico, which decided at that time they had dry tailings because for water conservation purposes, because they did have a lot of water around. And in fact, the Meliadine environment is like almost it's an Arctic desert, because you have about maybe 300 millimeter of precipitation a year. So there was this aspect as well, try to conserve water. So the fact that we had already a dry stack in Mexico, we could talk to the operators, because you know there are 2 parts. There is the part of at the mill. Okay, how do you filter these tailings, and in the at the pond, where, you know, maybe Raglan was more useful at that time. So it was really we had to do many iterations, and every time people said, yeah, well, you know, we don't know that, and we've never done it in Nunavut. And benchmarking is really important. And we did risk analysis, and strangely enough, one of the last things that was an obstacle, we were not even at the cost at that time. It was the fact that if we do dry stack, we have people on the tailings pond, which is and operating a bulldozer or whatever. And what would you do when there was a blizzard? They're out there and they're at risk. So, you know, we really dug really deep into the risk assessment. But what clinched the decision is that we were doing pre-consultation with the permitting authorities, and in 2014, Mount Poly happened. And the question came from the regulator: is it possible that this happens in Meliadine? And you really, because we still had evolved that dry stack scenario enough to be able to submit that scenario as well. It was really going in parallel, and because Michel was pushing to clarify stuff, and it was really ready, that this option was ready, so we switched to dry stack. And then after that came the operating one. Once it was decided what are the operating in the Arctic, and the wind and the strong wind that you have, and all these other aspects, and how do we optimize costs. So that all came after, but the decision was really a decision made because of Mount Poly. Really, that was the clincher. Now, if I turn to La Ronde had been operating since 1988, and had in fact a large tailings pond, which was expanded once. But it was easy to expand the tailings pond over there, because when you were expanding into a borrow pit, pretty much, because the material was there, you had to excavate the material, and that material could be used for to construct the dam. So we had one expansion of the tailings pond already, but then with the life of mine, I think at that time it was about until 2034, and the decision, like we started working in, I think it's 2018, on okay, how are we going to be able to put the next batch of tailings, and what technology could we use? So we started working on that, and of course, again, this dry stack was there, and one of the problem is that the tailings pond, the actual pond in the tailings pond, was used as it was part of the cyanide destruction process, and of course, when you try to be member of the or to be certified by the Cyanide Management Code, International Cyanide Management Code, you have to show that you control the cyanide in your pond. And of course, at the exit of the pipe, it was probably higher than 50, which was the 50 ppm cyanide. But we could not. You know, it was a natural process, and it was quickly degrading to below 10. But we could not prove that we had this process was controlling the cyanide. So it was an added incentive to go for dry tailings, because if we don't go for dry tailings, all the cyanide destruction is in the mill. So, but the thing is, the tailings pond at La Ronde is really close to Pretsac Lake, which is full of cottages again, and some of them very expensive. So it is a very sensitive area in terms of placing a tailings pond there. And expanding would have brought the perimeter fairly close to the lake. So there was a lot. When we did the multiple account analysis, there was a lot of constraints put on the continuing with the thickened tailings. But in the end, you have to build a business case, and this is not a new mine, so you have to build a business case. Does it pay for itself? Of course it doesn't now, but the clincher was closure cost. So we really worked hard to see, okay, what does that do to the closure cost? And in fact, if we didn't use the dry stack, we would have, like, the existing tailings pond could not be closed, because you needed that pond of water to, it was in the process of degrading cyanide. So the inclusion of the closure cost in the business case was really important. And again, it took like 3 years of convincing people, and oh, that's too expensive. And one thing that's really important is that we knew very well the operating cost of what we had. We knew that. And the operating cost of dry stack, we didn't know. Like, I mean, we started to, and it was just internal evaluation of cost, and people were conservative, and the operating costs that we came up with were really higher. So I will tell you, from by now, the costs have gone down, but you know, if you present a business case, you have to be more conservative. Anyway, it was the decision was made in 2021, and for both of these mines, nobody will say that it was a bad decision. Everybody's happy about the decision, but to tell you the truth, it was really painful. Anyway, did I put my 10 minutes?
You're just about bang on. Thank you, Louise. That's, and you're covering two projects. That's,
yeah.
Thank you very much. And Andrew, if we can turn over to you for an introduction to your focus.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there'll be some things that are actually sort of, you see a crossover between what Louise was talking about, where I was, but also some differences. So the project that we're talking about, or here for me, is that is what was originally called the Atlantic Operations, or the Atlantic Province Plan for Atlantic Gold, back the original developers of Touquoy Mine, and it was a hub and spoke plan. Touquoy Operations, which was the first mine permitted provincially, was to be the main processing plant and manage most of the tailings. 3 other development sites. Beaver Dam was going to be a quarry style whole ore shipped to Touquoy. And then we had our 15-mile stream, which was going to be a float plant with a tailings facility and a concentrate shipped to the Touquoy site for final processing. And then Cochrane Hill was another site that was going to have a float plant, tailings facility, and concentrate shipped to the Touquoy site. Now, the main reason, this is going back to 2007, at the time, one of the main reasons they were looking at that was to have a single location for cyanide. Cyanide had never really been used in Nova Scotia. There was some concern around the environmental impacts of cyanide, and so the company at the time had said, well, we only want one cyanide addition location for the projects. And so that's kind of where that where a lot of that hub and spoke came from. Now, although the initial Touquoy project was permitted provincially, the other 3 projects were federal. So, and they were all put in as individual projects. 15 mile and Beaver Dam projects were relatively advanced in the SIA 2012, or sorry, yeah, SIA 2012. Cochrane Hill was just a project description in SIA 2012. 2019, when everything got moved to the IA, it was actually I think it was August 2019, everything got moved into IA 2019 in the federal process. You were given 3 years extension on the projects to be able to get them in under the 2012. Because Cochrane Hill was only a project description, we pulled that knowing we would not be able to get that through in the 3-year plan. 15 Mile and Beaver Dam, we continued under that project. Now, the biggest, what sort of is a trigger for, if you want to call it, this is where we got all our lemons, and I'd say we're starting to make the lemonade. And there was a huge silver lining in what I'm about to express, but still not something that you necessarily want to go through. But everything around the hub and spoke process for Touquoy was based on the ability to go in pit with our tailings at a certain point. Our surface facility was going to be full. It was going to, it was originally designed to the specific capacity just Tukoi, the Tukoi ore, and then at that point, Tukoi pit would be depleted. The tailings from Beaver Dam, as well as those other projects, would go, and our low-grade stockpiles from original mining at Tukoi would go in pit. Unfortunately, we could not, in the timeline required, get in pit tailings permitted in Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia, it's not a secret that it's not really a mining jurisdiction. Has for many years sit at the bottom of the Fraser Institute's list of mining jurisdictions. Even last year, I think it was 67 of 68. And most of that driven on the permitting process. Now, one thing I'll say is that is definitely, we are seeing a drastic change in that in the last year, which is where a lot of the lemonade is about to be completed from those lemons that we got back in 2022, when we had to say, well, we can't finish the projects as is. But what that did was, so we had to pull those projects from the federal permitting process and start again. We had no tailings facility. We had nothing that those projects were designed for. We could not progress them as they were put into the process. So we had to start to look at a redesign. And this is where a lot of the courageous aspect of where we are right now sits, which is at this time, we knew we were in a very poor permitting location. We knew we had to make sure we had everything done so that we could be permitted. And we had a CEO who really realized that, who basically said, we have the time, we're not going to submit a permit. We do not think that we would get permitted provincially. No one has gotten through IA 2019 since it was instituted. So let's, we're not in a rush to permit. Let's take our time. Let's determine what we can do. And, there is no NPV to a project if it can't be permitted. So let's make sure whatever we have is permitted. And, for whatever that is. So we did a lot of multiple accounts analysis, a lot of trade-off studies to look at what could we do with these projects. And really that senior leadership, CEO and board as well, giving us the leeway to just keep working and finding out different ways. It's broken down to going right back to looking at things like our mine plan. So where we landed today, we've actually reduced the overall footprint of all these three projects by about 33% across the three of them, from 19% at one project to 54% disturbance area at another. The Beaver Dam project, we've reduced 40% of the waste rock coming out of it at a very minimal amount of value lost, because we don't have to rehandle and manage that waste rock that's coming out, and the ore associated with that waste rock. Although, if you look at the overall pit, it still all made sense, but there was a lot of extra waste rock being pulled out for some of the lower grade ore in some sections. So when we started breaking it down into sort of segments, you can start to see that, the infrastructure you have to put in place to look at taking, what was originally considered the full mine site, or, full pit, you don't really lose a whole lot of value. Yes, there was a small reduction in NPV, but when you look at the problem with NPV is it doesn't account for the cost of reclamation. Not truly. Net present cost does a better job at it, but there's still a lot of undervalued aspects of your reclamation plan in those two calculations. So if you really look at, okay, what is rehandle, what is just the longer term environmental compliance aspects of having bigger waste stockpiles, bigger more impacted area. Nova Scotia is very much like you can't walk 20 feet without walking through some sort of water course, and that's so all these things really start to take account into how you actually look at those projects. So what we end up with is a smaller pit. It's still a whole ore process at Beaver Dam. 15-mile project becomes the main hub. It's no longer a float plant. So the other great thing was, is actually when you look at both of all the other ore bodies, the two that we're going to put float plants at, they do much better as whole ore leach. So you actually get more recovery out of the whole ore leach than you ever would out of float plants, including the fact that you've got a float plant with not an area where you have easy access to flotation operators. So the losses associated with float plants can be incredibly high if you're not managing them properly. So all those things, you know, like I say, you start looking at, well, these ore bodies really, they should be whole ore leach, not float. So now whole ore leach plant at 15 Mile, Cochrane Hill, which was probably one of the largest areas of environmental concern because of the watersheds there, and the watersheds lead into St. Mary's River, which is one of the largest or most pristine salmon areas in the area. Now, again, we'd done all the work to show that even with the float plant, we weren't going to impact St. Mary's River. But when you talk about that social license, it's still something very, very difficult to get through in Nova Scotia when it's not a mining jurisdiction. We still have people asking us what we're doing with the mercury, because that's the last time any gold mining was done here before we started in 2017 and that's sort of what we, you know, that's what you have to think about as you're going through this. What does the project look like, and what's the education that you have to put in, and how long is that going to take? But by doing that, we have just a whole ore ship from Cochrane Hill to that Beaver Dam as well, or sorry, to 15 Mile as well. And then 15 Mile, we did a lot of work around the tailings. We did look at the filtered tailings. There were some issues around that, around just water quality, runoff, and things like that, which are better managed by a regular tailings facility. But we did actually spend a lot of time, and we've moved that tailings facility so it's in one watershed, rather than originally it was spanning a couple different watersheds, which create, you know, water management issues. But looking at those changes and being able to actually go through all of that and take that time, and just knowing that everything was on the table, led us to a project which is by far more permittable, and in the long run is going to actually be a higher NPV for the company, and like I say, more acceptable to the people of the province, and puts us in the timeline where we're now at the point where the government has started to shift towards resource development. So it all sort of tied into this great point where we are actually at a point where we can start to move ahead with a better project.
All right, thanks very much, Andrew. I sort of feel, Louise, you described two large projects with their own complexity. Andrew, I feel you have really had to tackle a lot of complexity in essentially what is a single venture. So lots of food for thought in what you guys have raised. And I'll just, so for our audience now, we'll take about another half hour to, I've got a few questions that I'd like to put to Andrew and Louise, but we would certainly like to hear from the other participants. If anyone has questions they'd like to raise, please put them into the Q&A function in GoToMeetings, and we will, Karen and I will kind of moderate them and bring them into the discussion. So please weigh in with your questions. We'll go in for about another half hour until 11 o'clock, at least here in Ontario in Eastern time. And we'll sort of do a formal close then, but I think our speakers can both stick around for a little bit longer. So if people want to stay after the end of the hour, we can continue this for a little bit. One of the things that's on my mind, we framed this discussion as around courageous leadership, and I looked up the definition of courageous once we put it in there, and it's defined as sort of not deterred by danger or difficulty. And I'm thinking, as each of you have laid out, in fact, years of discussion, and in each case people advocating, you know, someone sort of taking on some advocacy for a different approach. I think what often comes up in our other discussions is people feel that they can't bring things up, or people feel that they've raised something and it's been shut down. And I'm interested in thoughts either of you had on what dynamic let someone continue to persevere with what they think is a better solution. You know, what might they have had to overcome in the organization? And the flip side is, what was it about the organization perhaps that let people persevere with things that they thought should get done? And maybe Louise, we'll give Andrew a break and turn back to you maybe for a couple of minutes, and then Andrew will turn that to you.
Yeah, one thing that's sometimes that's happening is, if you're in charge of an environmental department or environmental function, people think that you don't care about cost. You are labeled with, oh yeah, of course, you know, these guys, they don't, you know, they can't really build a project. They will always go for the most conservative process, and that is a real obstacle. And in the end, what you have, if you're sitting at the, like in the case of Melody, if you're sitting at the table with the project design and the project, the people that are trying to make the project go through that IRR hurdle, and if you're bringing solutions all the time, then the perception changes. But at the beginning, there is a perception that if you are in environment, you're like a green person, and you know, you're not going to help the project push through, and that's totally wrong. We're in the same boat, you know. We want this project to succeed, and once you do that at the table of the engineering table, so to say, then you have to be able to come to the public hearings, because in Nunavut you have public hearings in front of people that don't know anything technically, and be able to convey what you're trying to do with dry tailings. They, you know, they don't really technical tailings and dry tailings. So there is a real obstacle in terms of communicating the advantages of your option. In the case of Laurent, the surrounding communities, they've been living with that tailings pond for years. They were not really bothered by whatever we were doing, and we didn't have a lot of support, so to say, from the community there. So it's a totally different environment, and you have to adapt.
Adaptability, I like that one. Andrew, I'm going to try and get a tagline from each of you, and then
I think for it's similar stuff. You need to know your audience. I mean, we were, like I say, with this, we were incredibly lucky, because, you know, when senior management is saying, just what are all the different things you can do, just think about it. It's great. So it's very open, but if you kind of need to understand how to bring the solution to who, you know, to the senior management at the time. They may have different views of things, and so there's usually a personality aspect. How does that person, how, you know, knowing that person, how are they going to react to what it is that you're bringing, or how can you bring it forward in a way that will at least generate conversation? But the other side of that is to listen to understand their why. Why is it that they didn't want you to move forward with that? They may see something in your solution that you don't, that you can then, okay, I can adjust for that. Or, you know, it might be that they just, like say, that there's another aspect of the project outside your scope that, you know, that conflicts with. So, you know, there's a couple of things where it's about really figuring out how you can have that discussion. And that will help you, you know, especially when you listen to the why, if there is a why that comes back, it helps you then progress forward with, you know, whether it's a revision of that, or you know, the next time you have to bring something forward, they know that you're actually listening to them as well as moving it forward. And that, you know, there will be people that it's my way or the highway, and then it becomes a question of, is that the type of place that you want to work? But if it's somewhere you want to work, you want to make the difference, and there's the people that can do it. It's about that, you know, it really is understanding the, you know, their communication skills and the way they listen and hear things to be able to present it to them.
Louise, you
Yeah, I just had another thing. It's about risk, and if you've never done it before, you're at the disadvantage. If you've not had, like the fact that we had a dry stack at Pinos Altos was a real plus, because we've done it before, not in the same, it was totally different, and it was a very small tonnage, but still, the risk of a new way or a new technology, that's a real obstacle that you have to be able to research and benchmarking, visit other sites that have done it. Very important from my point of view.
I think that's almost a whole, I think, other topic. But you kind of, in what each of you guys said on the first question, I'm thinking it also resonates with one of the questions that's come up from the audience, is sharing any insights from experience in communicating tailings management to local stakeholders. And I think what kind of came out in both your stories as well is that ability not just to identify something that may be technically better from an impact standpoint, but sort of the advocate for that solution, to be ready and able to sell the benefits of that solution, not just internally, but also to a public audience. And that's where some of the real benefit to the project comes, is in that communication to the public audience on the benefits of what's being done. And I think it's very important that someone come forward who can do that, so that the project really does realize that benefit. So I don't know whether you guys, either of you, wants to expand a bit on the importance and kind of the components of the ability to talk to local stakeholders about the solution and the benefits of it.
Yeah, use the word cyanide anywhere, and you have your work cut out for you, because tailings management is one thing, but the water that comes out, you have to be really clear about what you're doing, and all the monitoring that you're doing, and in fact that there is a whole team taking care of that. That's also very important in terms of communication. It's not a passive system. None of the tailings management that we have is passive. It's all active. Who at the mill, along, like if you have a pipeline leading to the filters, everything is monitored, and you have people in there. So I think from my point of view, that was also very, very important to show that we're not turning around and that's just at the end of the pipe, as I will say the old mining people were doing, putting the pipe at the top of a hill, and then it was flowing down to wherever. So active management to me was really important, to show we were prepared for whatever, and even for disasters. Now we have a dam breach analysis that we have to do anyway, and that sort of helps our dry tailings as well. Yeah.
No. Andrew, do you?
Yeah, I think especially with community, so we had community liaison committees, and they tend to be, hopefully if all goes well, I mean, that they become a bit of a cheerleader in the local communities where you're at. You're having regular meetings with them, and they become sort of central points. People can ask questions and they can bring them to you, which is a good thing. But we actually found, and this only really works once you're up and running, is that right from the very beginning, when we put that first lift on, doing public tours for us, for the local community. So we had the CLC members in, and then we would let them bring in they would bring guests with them for a tour, to actually really see what it is we're doing. And then over time, allowing, school tours, MLAs, anybody that can actually help express that to their neighbor who asks them questions and things like that. We spent a lot of time on building up plain language summaries and having those conversations with some of local leaders in the local area where we were working to try to help develop that, specifically around tailings, because it was definitely, one of the things that people were concerned of. Say mercury was, which, like say, just because of the way that mining was done here before, was definitely there, and then tailings, because again, it was all stamp mills and tailings are still on the ground where they were. So that aspect was definitely a big thing. And so there was a lot of effort put into right from the beginning, talking to the community about how we're doing it, why we're doing it, that was safe, bringing in the engineer of record into some of those meetings. And then once we got started, again, making sure that continually through it. And now, as we're into closure at the Tucoy, bringing them in to see the work that we're doing around closure. And that's helping, that'll help with the next projects of getting that. So it is about constant interaction with those public communities and people that can be your cheerleaders in the community.
When I'm thinking in something you raised, and Louise, I'll turn to you, but I think, and in fact, I think what you both have described are situations where the technical experts have contact with the community and are part of that engagement with the community. And for me, that's an important aspect of, I think, both being able to bring community issues into the technical discussion, because someone with a technical framing has heard directly, and also that trust in engagement with the community of technical people. And I don't know whether you want to expand at all on that in terms of the technical presence and community engagement.
Yeah, definitely, but not all engineers are born communicators, unfortunately. So you have to bring the right ones. And I just wanted to give you a stupid example, but you talk about tailings in front of people, they have no clue. So in one of our projects, we had a big Coke bottle filled with tailings and water, and people could hold it open. They said, "Oh my gosh, that's heavy," and they could see that the tailings were settling and the water was on top. So that was tremendously useful. What are tailings? They don't know. So it's but like I said, your communicators need to be coached, because they might confuse people if they're not used to it.
So capacity building maybe is a little bit of
it's capacity building in both ways, right? Because you get, especially when it's a group like our CLC, so it's the same people that you meet with like every quarter, you can build the capacity in them as well. As the, so they'll take on more and more. And so like our 15-mile project, we've had a CLC for that project with the community for I think 8 years now. Like ever since it was
just CLC, a community liaison committee.
Yeah, so we have there's a group of, I think there's 5 or 6 community members and there's actually a scope written out for them. They chair the meeting. They ask for us to present things, and every quarter we have a meeting. So we've got one for Tucoy with that group. We've got another group that is a 15-mile project one. And as soon as we started putting it into sort of federal permitting, we started this up with the other groups, and so they constantly talk about where that project is, and it's they get to know the team that's working for St. Barbara. We get to know them, and so you can build that trust. And like I say, they have become the cheerleaders in a lot of ways for in the area. Now they weren't, they're not all mining, pro mining, but for some of them it's just about understanding and sort of trying to turn somebody who's completely anti-mining into somebody who is the silent minority versus the vocal minority in some cases. But at least letting them know that environmentally, I'll never say that mining is no impact. Driving to work today was no impact, wasn't a no impact thing, but it's about limiting that impact. And, in the same way, even in closure, how do we continue to develop or to give back to the local community? So, you let those people know that aspect of it as well.
No, I think you raised an important point, which is important wins are not necessarily turning opponents into supporters, but they're even turning opponents into people who have a little more trust. If I can
Just
ask, I don't know,
maybe,
Louise, you want to say something? Can I
yeah.
throw a question in and then you can kind of
No,
make your
but
point?
it's really related to what Andrew is saying, is that you know, if you're in in an indigenous community like Miliadines, and our employees, I don't know, maybe 30% are from that local community. They are ambassadors. And the environmental superintendent at the mine used to tell me, I don't have only one inspector, I have 110, because they see what you're doing. So if you're doing the right thing, they will go home and say, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very true. If I can pivot a little bit, and I'll partly key off, and I think you both raised, and I think, Andrew, you in particular, the idea of sort of the internal champions kind of learning the language a bit and engaging, having a two-way engagement with other people in the project team as they try and sell an idea. And you've both raised the aspects of cost. And I'm interested in thoughts you can share around how cost discussions can be, and financial analysis, NPV, IRR, whichever of those measures can sort of be expanded a bit, so that it's not a discussion of whether it matters or not, but it's a discussion of whether is the mathematically highest IRR option the right one versus an acceptable IRR that may have other benefits. And I think, I see you nodding, so maybe I'll hand off, maybe Andrew, if I can kind of start with you and just your thoughts on how to make that discussion broader.
It's definitely can definitely become an issue, especially when you're looking at, like say, an overall project from the beginning, because like I say, the things like closure never really get fully well incorporated into it. So what we ended up doing, because we did, on everything that we did, IRR and PV, those are our numbers there, along with, but then it's about then risk assessing what are the rest of the things that come along with that NPV and IRR, right? So permittability, even though you can't fully, a lot of the time, especially when you're in PEA or pre-fees time, you can't state what your closure costs are going to be, but you can actually start to risk that this will cost more, because it means, this, by doing it this way, by ramping up and trying to get the fastest NPV and IRR by pulling the highest grade forward, it means that we've got 3 times the stockpile on surface, which, when you work out cost per ton, or that may not be that big of a difference, because you're front loading your return. But if it means you've got 3 times the waste rock on surface, rather than maybe slowing things down and infilling small pits with your waste rock, so you don't have to deal with, like as you're mining, rather than leaving yourself with such a big impact at the end, you can start to balance out, like, okay, well, this will definitely cost more closure than this, and start to, so you need to be able to have some sort of other, at least indicators, even if they're just a risk associated with those NPVs. And, when you do it, it's, in each project's going to be a little bit different, but there's always something that you can put in there, whether it's going to be the social license aspect. Again, you can't necessarily put a number on it, but you can, based on knowledge of people there, you can say, well, this will create more issues when we get into that, whether it's compliance or the environmental restrictions that'll get put in place. All these different things, you can put an estimate on the risk associated with them, and therefore you can move that as part of your scale on, driving away from the best NPV and best IRR.
Louise, you look like you're ready to jump in.
Yeah, I think you have to, or we have to realize that, we're in competition for capital. If my project doesn't make the IRR, somebody else will. and they all come to the, like, they're in the pipeline, and the first one that gets this 15% IRR is winning. So when you start a project, you have that in your head, and you're sitting with a number at the end, say for Meliadine maybe around $1 billion, and you are part of the team that will make, you put everything in that box, and you make sure that nothing goes above that. So you're working on that. The other thing is, talking about tailings, sustaining capital, totally different. You're talking about what you need day one to construct to be able to operate the mine. So if you look at the tailings pond, you're not constructing the tailings pond on like if you thickened tailings, for example. You're not constructing your dams for the life of the mine, but you will construct your filtering plant for the life of the mine. So there is a real difference, because in the constructing of your tailings pond, you will every 3 years increase, and it's going to be sustaining capital that won't appear in the $1 billion box. So you are already at a disadvantage if you use a solution that's using a lot of capital to begin with. So you have to fight that. And the ease of operation is a very important one, because everywhere, as you know, dealing with water, like managing water, is expensive. Whether it's treatment, all the what you have to do with water, taking into account now climate change, with more, like the 100-year flood is like higher than it used to be. So that's where you can come in with your solution will not be at risk if. So, but definitely the RRR, not a battle that you're going to take, not a technical anyway. You have to push through, and you're in the same team. You're not only like when you say, I said I need a champion. We did have a champion. Michel Julien was the champion, but he got disciples along the way for his quest.
And well, maybe ask you if you can expand a little bit on that theme. And again, you guys have both raised this, but maybe there's a little bit of thinking you can share with other people on how to approach it. Because I think what you both raised is solutions that have a particular environmental benefit, but also have a whole inventory of other benefits, and that expanding on all the benefits and helping to quantify them, engaging around how to really realize those benefits, I think has been important in all of the decisions that you guys have talked about. So I don't know whether you've got any, and maybe as we're getting towards the top of the hour, one of the questions I wanted to put to you was, what particular advice might you share with our participants, thinking we have people who've dialed into this because they each have situations and opportunities that they're perhaps trying to pursue in their companies, but maybe focusing on that theme of how do you really round out and find the most holistic set of benefits to a solution. What sort of, any thoughts to share with people on how to sell something really holistically?
You have those very holistic questions, should I say? But really, I would say personally that there is a lot of baseline to do. You need to know your site. You need to know the social baseline. You need to know. You can't really like if you don't have time, and the permitting timeline sometimes kills you. But if you don't have time to have a good baseline, and these baselines are useful, they will give you increase or lower risk of this or that. But the thing is, for projects that are starting, and you want to have, like, okay, there is a dip in the production in 2029, so you need to have that production in line in 2029, so you have a wall there. So baseline sometimes is not seen as very important, or you rush through. You can't. The more you know about, okay, what's the foundation of your site, are there any social risks that you don't understand because there was a there was a mine that was left not in a good state, whatever. The baseline is your most, from my point of view, this is your most useful weapon, because you will bring facts to the table, and the people will, they will work with you, like the engineering teams will work with you, because you have a strong base for what you're saying, and you're reducing risk, but you know where you are in terms of geochemistry, like the stability of the potential for raising dams or whatever, and you know your product as well. You have to work with the metallurgist. Is there anything we can do at the mill to help you? So
Andrew,
Yeah, I agree. I think that the primary part is, yeah, those baselines and everything like that, everything has to be there. You need to know it. And, then if you're talking about, how do you present, what from that, what is the best that we can do? Or, like, how are we going to present that to, which may not be IRR or NPV, it may not be the best, still meets all the goals, but maybe not the best ones. And I go back to something I mentored many years ago, told me it was assume positive intent. So when you need to, in yourself, assume the positive intent. What I'm bringing forward, what we're as a team, what we've decided on, is the best positive outcome for not just the company, but for the people, the environment. It is, our intent is to make money for the shareholders. That's our primary goal in everything we do, right? Is to return value to shareholders, but through that, to return value to the community, and to make sure that we are, treating the environment as best we can with our best intent, while still, recovering those. So, and I've found in my career more and more that environmental and social awareness within the company is driven internally. So I mean, I am lucky to have worked with people who I feel have always thought that, and I know that that's probably not the case across everybody's here. But my personal lived experience is that is the case, and that when you move forward with that positive intent, that you get traction. It means you can build traction within your team. If your team believes this and knows that they are doing what is right, especially when you have the people that live in the community that they're working in, then it helps build that momentum internally, and that then helps actually build momentum externally as well, because that helps build your social license. When people know that you are, yes, you're gonna put a hole in the ground, but that there's gonna be value to much more, and that when you're done, you're going to do everything you can to return that to an environment that is either as good or better than, for the local community and for the environment itself, than when you started. And go forward with that belief, and that really drives a lot of a lot of value within your team, and then to the people you're presenting to.
Louise?
yeah, I would like to add one advice, because and it's to make it personal. Bring your CEO in the community, in front of the people, and they will take, like, the CEO or bring sometimes the board even. They know that they have this responsibility in front of the people, so that really helps.
Okay. I had introduced this saying we would kind of aim for a formal close in a minute now. And partly we weren't going to initially ask people for an hour and a half, but I think we've had a really good discussion. And so while everybody's here, I really want to thank Andrew and Louise for sharing your time and your thoughts on this. I've found it's a very interesting discussion. And so maybe I will invite, if there are people participating who had only blocked out an hour and need to move on, feel free to do that. But our panelists have offered to stay around for another half an hour or so. And I know I have at least one other question I wanted to raise into this. So if that works for everyone, we will continue. We will call this the informal part of our discussion. And thank everyone for attending. And if you can't stick around, that's great. Louise, you said something earlier that I wanted to follow up on. And so I'll put this specifically to you, but Andrew, if you have thoughts on it, it really meant something to me when you described in Meliadine that when Mount Poly happened, that Agnico had been carrying dry stack tailings in parallel, even though it wasn't the part of the official project plan. And for me, that's a challenging thing to do, and there's little appetite and there's to carry options too far into a project. But I think there are times, and I think you raised a great example of where it can actually be very valuable. And interested if you can you expand at all on kind of that idea of, how do you decide to carry something in parallel? Kind of how do you manage that? Because there can be real opportunities in it.
It was related to permitting because, if we had taken this B7 lake, we would have had 2 years of permitting to actually destroy that lake with our tailings. So we carried it because we didn't know the answer from the regulators. It wasn't just because not to be nice, but it was a risk management thing. And in the end, it paid off because in 2014 we got this question. I can't remember. Must have been the Federal Ministry of the Environment. And we went, okay, that's going to be difficult to, prove that's they wanted us to prove that this would never happen. And as you know, zero risk doesn't exist. And at times regulators, they want zero risk. So, and given that, and given the fact that, if we were to take B7 Lake, it would also mean another uncertainty in terms of timing of getting the permit to construct. So I think that both of these things played a role. It was an insurance policy, really, to have that. Not always the case, but in that case it was.
And so I'm thinking in that context, because I've been in projects where I think there's often a variety of aspects of the project where, in the interest of moving the project forward, there's a decision made, and I think often projects miss the opportunity to realize where they could continue in parallel a little bit without affecting the project. And if I take that generic thought, I think what you're raising is when you can clearly articulate the risk that is being hedged by carrying an alternative, that's when you've got the case to do it.
If I may just add a very small aspect of Meliadine, the groundwater is salty. It has 5 to 6% salt. We're besides Meliadine Lake. So I think that was also, I forgot about that, but I think that was also keeping a body of salt water. So I think there was a risk. There was a risk of us trying to permit that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And a question's come up. Maybe I'll throw into the mix, and Andrew, then turn to you, and you can either answer my last question or one of our participants has raised the, and I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, but the challenge of companies adopting new technologies, and I think certainly you've raised that. I think there's sometimes a perception that Canadian companies are particularly bad at it, and that sometimes even Canadian developed technologies get picked up elsewhere in the world before they do in Canada. So I don't know whether you have observations particularly on sort of Canadian companies versus others, or even in general, you know, that issue, and how do we, I think we can always get better at how to smartly pick up new technologies. But I will turn that to you guys for your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We should say at Vale, it was the race to be second when you came into mining stuff and new technology, right? Like you never want to be the first person to do it. It was always like that was, you know, where risk, risk factors were always escalated so much when you put them into project assessments if it was new technology. And so the Australians seem to be much more risk tolerant when it comes to new technologies compared to Canadian operations. And
can I throw in just, do you think that's partly a function of size? Is it that larger international companies have a more ability to let one location pioneer something, or?
No, well, I mean, Inco was never really great at it, and they were pretty big at the time. So at Ballet, but I still not sure where it came from. But I had a manager who came from Australia, and when I worked for Ballet, and it was very much we should be looking at, and even the technical groups, you could see pushback and things like that at times. But so I'm not sure exactly where it came from. I don't know if it was from long-term failures previously and things like that. But yeah, I mean, definitely do see it, and have in my career. And it's probably where, if you were to ask me about that, carrying duplicates, and that's probably where a lot of that will sit, is, with new technology versus old. Usually what happens is new technology sits as this, well, we'll keep it in the background in case we see that there's, somebody else has started using it and we've got enough, now have enough knowledge of it, versus the other way around, where you take the new technology and say, okay, well, the backup will be the old technology. But yeah, no, it's definitely there. I think there's probably some smaller companies. It's funny because I'd say some of the smaller companies are probably better at taking the risks on new technologies than the bigger companies.
Fair enough. Louise, you're.
Yeah, I will talk about best technology, because you remember the Church of England, they were pushing for everybody to be dry stack and stuff like that. So this is the way you manage your tailings. That's what we're talking about right now. Is not a dogma. It's not dry stack for everybody, open pit for everybody, or whatever. A mine is not a shoe factory. A mine is within a given geographical setting, given climatic setting, so there is no dogma to me. You have to evaluate every time what is the best technology where you are. And I agree that we might be a conservative in mining, but we're also very cooperative. If I ask you, Andrew, can I visit so that I learn from you, you will say yes. We went to Raglan. So at the same time, we are open to sharing what we learn, because everybody, like, it raises the bar for everybody. So I really think we're not, this industry and the tailings in particular, they have to take into account where they are. Where is that mine in the watershed, in the geological setting, and what is the product that you're putting in there? So it's so local that to me there is no dogma. You have to do your homework from start. Don't get all excited by any new shining object. You have to do the homework.
And if I can pick up on that, because I think the homework tells you whether it's right in that location, but I'm thinking as the two of you were talking, as we talk about, I'll say, being more, I was going to say adventurous with new technologies, and that may be against what I'm going to raise next. But I think in the same way you talked earlier about the need to engage, the need to understand and be sympathetic to the perspectives of the other people in an organization, I think you're talking a little bit the same on the new technologies, which is how do you point out a smart way to use the technology? How do you point out the specific advantages in an application, Louise, to what you're raising? And I'm thinking, Andrew, when you were sort of referencing maybe people coming in from Australia and being a little bit more gung-ho, what came into my mind is, are they seeing it differently? Are they, seeing it as a process of bringing something in rather than a bet on something succeed? Anyway, just anything you guys might expand on in how those discussions take place, perhaps more effectively.
Yeah, sorry, in my case, in our case, we are lending our sites to universities so they can come and try stuff, and that's because we want to try. We might not have all the experts, and we're busy operating. So I really think somewhere by linking with a research institute or whatever, we are pushing technology that we would not otherwise have even thought of ourselves.
Andrew?
Yeah, so for me, using cross-functional groups, because different people view things differently. So it's similar. When you bring in students, they're looking at something that's different than what maybe somebody's been there for 20 years. Is seeing in that piece of technology or the way we do things, and it might be the same equipment that you just, you look at it a different way. So whether it's the environmental team working with the operations team or the engineering team, if you get the multiple different different minds thinking about it, then you get those, somebody looks at it, that could be used, or the data could be used a different way, or what if we turn it this way or that way? So you do get a little bit more of that when you have, I say that the different groups, different people looking at the same, the same process. You just get to look at it a lot of different ways, and so it's across that whole board as you're going through it. Bring in all the different people that are going to be interacting with it, and get their thoughts on it, because you can use that as a great way of let's say, seeing what you don't see.
And like the first step of change management is a burning platform. So sometimes you do have a burning platform. You have no choice but to find something else. And I will give you my own example at Laurent. When we had toxicity at the effluent, we implemented eventually a bacterial treatment, which is, who would have thought? But we had no choice, and sometimes you need that to push technology through. And doing the same thing all over again, if it works, it's reassuring.
One thought that's going through my head is, I'm thinking, you two guys are talking about this. We have you talking here because you're talking about companies that have nurtured these sorts of innovations or willingness to take on innovative approaches. Do you have any thoughts on what is it that sets that tone in a company to be able to do that? And I'm gonna let you talk because I'm gonna get a drink of water.
Of course, it starts from the top, doesn't it, Andrew? I think it starts from the top, in order for to have that kind of vision. Starts from the top.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It starts from the top, and typically that brings in a team that continues to think that, right? People who want to be part of that stick around. People who don't stick around. It's the same thing with when you've got, when the management at the top isn't doing that, you get a different shift of people that are going to stick with the company versus people that will not stay around with the company and will go try to find a company that finds that. But again, I think more and more as years go by, there are more companies that are where you have they realize that good management in senior management is how you continue to make a company thrive. So I feel like it's getting better and better no matter where you are, but it is really it's CEOs, board members, the senior management, and I guess I'm including myself in that and hoping that I'm driving the same down to the team that I've got is that we do what's right and try to make sure that we're thinking through, like I say, all the social aspects as well, and so you have to build a culture, and that culture has to start from the top.
Just maybe one thought about what is a good company? What is a good operator? A good operator will manage their money properly. They will manage their people properly. They will manage their environment properly. You can't, if you only make money and you don't take care of the rest, you're not a good company or a good operator. And in the end, you will not succeed. That's my definition.
And if I try flipping that question around, because we may have participants who haven't seen the signs of the culture that you're looking for, but that doesn't necessarily have to stop people. Or sort of what advice would you have to the people that aren't top management in terms of either how to find the seeds of what they can lever to do something innovative, or just how do you navigate that if you don't see it immediately? Because I'm guessing both you might be people who have done that in the past.
No, but I think mining associations do a great job of that. You don't want to be shamed into not doing the right thing when you're part of a group, even if you're a small company. I mean, I think the Mining Association of Canada has raised the bar for everybody in terms of environmental management and social management and community management. So I think if you are a small operator or whatever, and you don't belong to these associations, I think the first step would be, because they give you a lot of support. They get sort of it's a generic support, but they will support you in improving. That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, there's depending on what organizations that you can part of. We're here as part of CIM, right? CIM's got great resources to help with a lot of the different people that you can reach out to and talk to. There's CMP, a lot of the societies, CIM, depending on where it is that you're looking at, have great resources, and like I say, the mining industry is great for being able to talk to other people for expressing those things. If you're talking about internally in your company, it's say that I go back to that one, and truly it is something that I use almost daily, which is that assume positive intent. People are doing what they do for a reason. Understand that reason, and then if you can understand the reasoning on why you feel like they are money based versus socioeconomic based, which are two different aspects of it, then you can understand it and start to actually try to create a mutual agreement. Maybe it's not what you want, maybe it's what they want, but if you understand why and where they're coming from, because they're obviously, their direction is for a reason, right? So, and if that reason is it's completely like it is all about the finances, we don't care about the environment, well, then you're gonna have to assess if maybe these aren't my people. But if you understand the why they're doing things and you assume that they're doing it for a good reason, and maybe it's that they don't have the information, maybe it's because they just see something differently, or they're thinking that they're taking the same direction you are, you can have the conversation. But it is, like I say, that's the start of, figure out what it is and why they're doing what they're doing to have that conversation.
I might just expand on, I think you guys both touched on this, but the thought that if you are trying to advocate something within your company, if you are trying to sell a new solution, one of the tools is really understand what standards your company commits to and what frameworks your company is committed to, because you learn those and you may find elements of your case within what your company is committed to, and that is that's an exploration within the company. But if you at least understand what are down as commitments by the company, you can reference those. And I think you also touched on it, Andrew, which is also accept that you can't always be dogmatic about it. There may be a middle ground, there may be different interpretations, but at least there's some foundation, I think, in the commitments that your company has voiced publicly. Louise, and then Karen has it.
I felt the need to jump in on this one because part of my past roles in corporate realm was when we were first trying to bring in sustainability into an organization and trying to, gain support across the industry and at the different operations. And I was, them at the corporate office, and so there's always this, you have to make sure that you can relate to the folks that you are speaking with. And I think, also looking at it from a lens of, now I am a business owner and we have solutions to bring to the industry as well. So it's both aspects. You have to really, I think, do your homework. And as David has said, like align with the goals, objectives, and strategies of the company as best you can, and do your homework to show those alignments, those values. Because if you can't communicate that to somebody, then you're not going to get anywhere with just saying, here's an idea. So you have to do some homework on that front. But I think the other thing is particularly internally, there are a lot of leaders internally that are not necessarily the managers and so finding those people who have a lot of a voice in the organization, and seeing where you can make the connections there, because if they see the value that you do for their roles or for the business in general, they may be able to help bring it forward. So using those voices to move ideas along is a way that we found a lot of traction to move things from grassroots up. So, yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I tell people all the time is that when you participate in a project, you shouldn't be the one to say yes, but, or yes, but not doesn't work. You have to, like, the assuming positive intent. I love it because I really think you have to be perceived that way. You're also trying to improve the project by whatever you're doing. And in my years, one thing I did very well: copy from the best. Look at what your guy, the group or the company that you think is it. Then copy. Well, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just take a page from their from their book. And talking about standards, it's a two-way street, because standards could be just paperwork, not more paperwork, no, but you have to link the standard to the improvement. So this is a whole a big work, because people will not like standards unless they see a benefit. And sometimes the benefit is just to standardize your operation. If everybody walks in the same direction, you'll get better. But yeah, those are my 2 cents again. You're on mute, my dear.
All right. Maybe if we can touch on regulation as well as standard for a moment, because a couple of questions came in around how companies efficiently meet regulatory standards, and also a question around, and maybe it's the ambitions that companies express versus what may, how things may appear when you actually look at the way things are unfolding. And one of them was building dams with the end in mind. Do we really do that? Or how do we really do that? But maybe sort of with either of those questions around kind of how, your thoughts on how companies approach regulatory compliance with all those other cost and operational drivers as well, but maybe also that theme of how good are we, or where do we get better at building with the end in mind?
Well, so I think that, I mean,
and Karen's pointing out in 2 minutes each.
Yeah, okay. With the regulatory side thing, I mean, there is just a portion of it that you just have to do, right? Like, so you can try to manage and have conversations, but you just, it's a cost and it's a requirement, and there's a lot of those bits. There's just no way to get around it, and they're required, and rightfully so, and for most of them anyways. So you just, okay, how are we going to do it most efficiently? The building with the end in mind, I think that's a relatively new thing. I think that we will get better at it. It is something, you know, like, especially when you start to, right now, our big one is looking at green energy in final, right? So all green energy wants to distribute area. What do we have? We have disturbed areas. So, you know, tailings facilities, if they're structurally sound, are a great place for solar panels because they are typically high. So, you know, we're starting to look at things like that in the design of our new projects. Pumped hydro systems, because most expensive part of a pumped hydro is the big hole you got to put into the ground. What do? We put big holes in the ground for open pits, so you can actually have a lower reservoir. So those things we're actually implementing in that design, but it's relatively new in industry. But I think it's, again, it'll be something that we get better at. Things always change in the mining industry, so your reclamation plans are constantly changing based on, you know, either new ore bodies and things like that. But we're definitely putting more effort in the front end now, and I think most companies are, compared to what we were even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would say that the first thing that's important to me is that when you're sitting at the design table with the other guys that are doing, or ladies that are doing the design for the new mine, they don't know what you know. They don't know the regulations. They need to be educated. They need to know that, for example, in order to push a permit forward, you will need such and such data. And I'll tell you, it's surprising to know that they don't know, but it is a fact that you end up with a design which has holes in it from an environmental or social point of view, because they didn't think about it. And the other thing is you need to get involved in order for you need to have a vision of where the regulations are going. You need to have enough time to do that, mind you, and enough people. But if you know before the regulation come in, so you can actually talk to your team saying, you know, I think we need to do better on that side because it's coming. And sometimes the writing is on the wall, can't ignore it, but you need to be involved in the regulations. And unfortunately, it's not going, it's not decreasing.
All right. We're at the bottom of the half hour, or almost there. And I think a good time to wrap up. We still have 19 of our 26 participants, so hopefully this last half hour has been worth people's while. I know there's one question that's sitting there around a water treatment technology and someone who's trying to get a water treatment technology picked up by a company. I don't think that's something we can address specifically here. I will raise that what comes to mind is CIM has also last year started an innovation focused society. And I think that question around how do companies get better at identifying technologies that they should be picking up and perhaps how do technology providers get better at explaining the merits and the risk management is something, if I can ask if that questioner can keep that question in mind for that society as well, because I think it's an important topic.
Yeah, and I would also close with saying that CIM does have a call for abstracts out for their next conference in May next year. The abstract submissions are due, I think, mid-November. So if you go on their website, CIM Connect, you can look up the topics there. You can submit an abstract, and they prefer case studies. So if you can present your technology with where it's been applied or have some results in some fashion, then you'll have more traction in getting the chance to present there. So those are some avenues to bring that forward as well. I'm really happy that everybody tried to stay through right till the end. We have quite a good crowd today, so thanks everyone. And Louise and Andrew and David, thanks so much for the great conversation today. So let everybody go.
Thanks, everyone.